when you're on the road, for the listeners, when you're on the road, you have we travel with a number of different Pelican cases. They're hard cases, and you just pack them full, and you try to really organize them really well in terms of different equipment that you feel like you might need for the players that you have on your team, right? That works really well for their flow and needs. So a bunch of different Pelican cases, like we might set one up for hip rehab, or this one's shoulder rehab, or that one's a strength and conditioning case, and so it has more things that might be used with the S&C coaches a little bit more. And we have another big Pelican case for our nutrition staff, right? And everyone has their little cases that they travel with, right?
Welcome back to Full Court Press. I'm your host, Matt Tuttle. Today, our guest is physical therapist and sports scientist for the Portland Trail Blazers, Cruz Romero. I'm excited to welcome Cruz on today, as we've known each other for 6 or 8 years now, from when he was a student with Exos into his role as the physical therapy manager with Exos, and he was helping out with a long-term rehab for us when he needed to be away from the team. And now into a full-time MBA role, Cruz has ascended through sports physical therapy very rapidly and with humility every step of the way. Today, we have a great discussion around how staff structure impacts day-to-day activity, life in the NBA, and how communication varies amongst different stakeholders, whether players, front office, or coaches inside of an organization. So without further delay, here's our show with Cruz Romero. Hope you enjoy it. So welcome back, everybody. We're here with Cruz Romero from the Portland Trail Blazers. Cruz, welcome to the show.
Hey, man, thank you so much. This is really, really an honor. Excited to be here with you. We've known each other for some years now, worked a little bit together before, and in different aspects and avenues. But yeah, man, it's just great to connect again. Happy to be here.
I'm glad to have you, Cruz. A lot of experience with the Trailblazers. What's your official title now with them?
Yeah, I am the physical therapist / sports scientist with our team.
Right.
And it's always interesting, when you get these hybrid titles, because it's like the sports science role. It's not a traditional sports science role. Probably like a lot of your experience that you may have had with the Nuggets when you were there, but the sports science role is more of like a medical sports science role. I can talk more about our staff a little bit, but a lot of the typical sports science ins and out things, reporting and all that stuff gets done by someone else on our team. So I'm more of like practitioner, boots on the ground, sports scientist. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, totally. We'll dive into that. Tell me first,
Yeah.
how was All-Star break? Tell us about where you are in the season. Where do we find you today?
Okay. Yeah. Well, right now we're in market. We're in Portland. We just, got back a couple days ago. We played a couple games already. And All-Star was amazing. I went home to Phoenix. I thankfully got a little bit of a break. Another one of our staff members went to Indy this year with two of our players, so that was great. And yeah, man, I got a chance to really decompress. Like right in the middle of the season, that December, January time is just the dark days. Everyone's like pushing through and trying to get by. Everyone's all the players, they got little nicks and injuries and things that are hard for them to physically get through. Mentally, we've played 50 something games. So, we've traveled a lot. So it just kind of wears on you, both physically, mentally. And then you hit All-Star and it's like you get 5-ish days. And those days are so key and important because, as you just work every single day. And there's no concept of time or a weekend or anything like that. So when you get 5-6 days consecutive just to hang out and do whatever you want, you feel like, I feel amazing right now.
Yeah, you feel like $1 million coming out of the break, and you're running downhill real fast after with 25, 30 games after the break. The season is over in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, quick. Yeah, and our March is going to fly by, man. We have, I think in March we have like 21 games. It's crazy. We have like 4 back-to-backs. Yeah, it's pretty wild. It's going to fly by.
So unpack that for the listeners a little bit, because I don't think on any of the previous episodes we've done that. But can you speak to? We'll jump into the staff composition after. But can you speak to what a back-to-back looks like an away back-to-back from a schedule standpoint, and why that is so taxing? Not necessarily just on players, but on you as a staff member.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's taxing on any individual that's a part of the travel party, right? Players, I'm sure a ton physically, but yeah, also on the staff physically and mentally. So essentially what happens is, let's just say like we have a back to back against Memphis here pretty soon. Well, no, you mentioned back to back, maybe different city, but let's just get into it. So you fly over to a city maybe a day before, right? You unpack, you get settled in the hotel room. You might have treatments that evening. It's just everything is centered around, if you were able to get the things accomplished that you needed to get done, you reported appropriate information to, the staff, the coaches, so that they can prepare their game plans, etc. Whatever it is, any medical information that needs to happen either happens before we leave on the trip, like we might have a practice or something at the practice facility, then fly out, go to another city, or you might fly early in the morning, get to a new city, unpack, do everything, do all your medical updates and treatments, anything that you need to do in the city. You'll go to sleep. Let's say we have the game the next day. Let's say we were in Memphis, for example, right? Fly to Memphis, do all of that. Then we'll play a game, and immediately, essentially, you players take showers, you do all that. The staff, we change into comfy clothes because we're about to get on an airplane, and you're flying to the next city. It's like you have a back to back. So you have to be in somewhere, hopefully, the NBA gives you they're nice to you, give you a nice schedule, somewhere reasonably close. Like, I'm thinking like Atlanta, New Orleans, somewhere that reasonably close to Memphis, Charlotte, somewhere else around that area. You have an hour, maybe a 2 hour flight to that city. You're landing, you end the game at 7 p.m. game. Let's just say you end at 10:30, right? You get on the plane, you fly 11, maybe, you might cross a time zone or two, not two, but a
Yeah.
time zone maybe. So you get into the next city at about 12, 1 a.m. maybe. But that's not where it stops. You don't just get to your magically, there at 12:01 and you get to go to sleep. Like you have to wake back up because all the staff has to help with equipment. We have to, do everything. So I'm just thinking, let me just walk through it. So I get off the plane, put my bags on the bus. I get off the bus. I go help with equipment. That come back to the bus. We might have a 20-30 minute drive to the hotel, right? So then when you get to the hotel, you have to unpack all of the equipment that you need in the hotel. And, one person on our staff, we have a really helpful staff, will help our equipment team, right? So
Mhm.
if they need to make a trip to the arena, I mean, that happens that night. We got to back to back the next game. So they have to
Yeah.
get the arena kind of equipment at least in a reasonable area, right?
Yeah.
At the arena. So someone will take a trip with them, and then the rest of the team is like unloading and putting stuff into their designated place. You don't have to set up the treatment room that night or anything, but you have to put stuff in a reasonable place.
Yeah.
Um, and you get up to your room, and it's probably 3, 4 a.m., and you've fully woken up by that point. So then you're like, man, now I'm like really having trouble trying to fall back to sleep. So I might not go to bed until somewhere between maybe 4 and 6 a.m. It can
Yeah.
feel like, and then
It's
you're
that's
back up again. This is kind of like one of the little uh this is huge from the players. They get to get off the bus and they go straight to the room, go to bed, hopefully. But for the staff, let's just say I went to bed at 6 a.m., right? Because I couldn't fall asleep. Well, let's say we have a player that might be questionable that night. You're waking up at 9 a.m. You're waking up at 10 a.m. because you need to deliver that medical information to the coaching staff so they can make appropriate decisions on how they're going to manage the game, the tactics and strategy of what they're going to do, right? Their minutes, their rotation, however it works with the players. And if you have a guy that's kind of on the borderline, then they need to know that. So you're waking up, and the player needs to wake up by 10 so that they can get that information because the meeting might be at 11 or noon or whatever it ends up being that
Mhm.
day. So yeah, it's quick, man. It's very dynamic. It's a lot. The schedule is tough. That's why being at home is so nice because you have home court advantage. You have this, your amazing fans and all of that. But two, you get to wake up at a reasonable hour in your own bed and manage things, in your own place.
Yes.
So
Those rare
it's incredible.
home back to back is always a nice. Those are
Right.
always the best. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So then you talk about catching, a team uh, on the second night of a back to back, and you realize why it is it's such a big deal.
Yeah.
It can
It's a
be such a,
massive. It's a massive advantage.
advantage. Yeah. Right.
Well, thank you for doing that because I think the listeners will appreciate the craziness that really happens when you land in a city that you are the one unloading the plane. Somebody's going to the arena at 2 or 3 in the morning to help the equipment stuff. Like it's not always lights, camera, action. Like there has to be all the setup to get to that point, and that's pretty significant. Talk to me. You mentioned one of your staff goes over there, and that probably rotates. But talk to me about the structure in Portland. I know there's been some reshaping over the last few years there. So what does the structure
Yep.
look like? Kind of top down medical performance. How's that integration work?
If you work in outpatient PT, you interact with your EMR a lot. You deserve to have an experience that's seamless and integrates all the things you might need to do, like a patient portal, marketing automations, and billing, all in one, all at an unbeatable value. That's what MW Therapy does. Switching over is a breeze. Take a test drive right now and see what you could do with them at mwtherapy.com. Now, where's your PT career license taking you? Get a driver's license, you can drive wherever you want. If you're a physical therapist with a license, you can provide physical therapy wherever you want. That's what Jackson Therapy Partners is there to do. Extraordinary patient care adventures with Jackson Therapy Partners. Perfect for PTs eager to make their mark. Do what you want to do, where you want to do it. See where your skills can take you at jacksontherapy.com. And if you've heard about this thing, we've had it on the show before. It's called remote therapeutic monitoring. And it could boost your clinic's revenue and help more people. Those two things are good. Find out how Physiotech can help you do that. That is Physiotech at their website, physiotech.ca. That's physiotech.ca. Maybe boost your revenues, your clinic's revenue by $290 per patient per quarter now with Physiotech.
For sure. Yeah. This is actually really cool. This is going to be a little bit different. So hopefully the listeners can appreciate this. Our structure has, especially with our personnel, has changed, like you said. And I think it's really cool. Actually, I've been able, from a sports medicine standpoint, this season, every season really, but for this season especially, to learn a lot more, because our director of player health and performance now is actually an orthopedic surgeon. So from a diagnostics decision making standpoint, medical evaluation on the spot, like that has been like much faster. It's just way cleaner than I think it has been in the past that I've experienced. Because essentially, if you don't have that person there, then you might have, let's say, maybe an athletic trainer, a chiro, PT in that director of player health and performance position, right? That lead medical position potentially. Well, then, you have to, player gets injured, player gets evaluated by the staff, and then we decide, okay, like the question is always like, what level of severity and what are we thinking here, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
do we need medical management? Do we need imaging? Do we need something else? Well, then you have to send them over to the team doc anyway, right? Well, our team doc is our director of player health and performance. So that's kind of special. I think it's been really interesting, and this type of model with ortho or team doc, sports medicine doc anyway, exists in Europe quite a bit.
Yeah.
Euro soccer, a lot of that, and so there's models that exist this way, right? It's just I've never been a part of one until now. Well, then underneath that you have a couple tiers. So everyone, for the most part, directly reports to him.
Yeah.
Whereas in other organizations, you might have a second tier where you have like a director of performance and a director of rehab, right? In our model, it's you have that, then you have physical therapists, athletic trainers, and strength and conditioning coaches. We have massage therapists on our team as well, and then we have a manager of sports science on our team. So it's kind of this flattened hierarchy with the typical head strength coach and head athletic trainer. Then you have assistant strength coach and assistant athletic trainer. Myself and one other physical therapist on our team. We have 2 therapists, we have 2 athletic trainers, and we have 2 strength coaches, and then 1 sports scientist. So that's our structure. It's been great, man. It's been great to to learn kind of along the way and see different structures and models. I've had have seen different structures when I travel. I ask about structure. This is a very common question. You want to
Yeah.
know how things work with other organizations and all that. Um, but yeah, ultimately, I think the goal for every organization, at least within the high performance type department, health and performance, is player health, right? Player health, availability, and durability. So we're all doing our best job to really push for that.
For sure. And it's super interesting to have you talk about it. First, myself, who's been in both sports, to have worked in the NBA and then worked in high level soccer, to
Yep.
very much
Yep.
understand that model in Europe is they have physicians full time on staff in the building 5 or 6 days a week, and that is the physician's primary driver. And of course, there's advantages and disadvantages to all these models, but we're all shooting for the same
100%.
target. It's just a really hard target to hit across an NBA season, keeping players healthy
Right.
and active and on the floor. So I kind of want to relate this back to a little bit of the question on All Star of across the course of the NBA season with that staff structure. Does your management of injuries change, right? Like now that we're in the last 25, 30 games of the season, does that
Mhm.
shift the perspective? Does that shift management strategies for you guys? What do you notice coming out of the All Star or in these different phases of the season?
That's really interesting. I think it's individualistic. You have to ultimately think about the player in front of you always, right? Um, I can think of instances where we start the season, we do our baseline level screening with all of our players, which includes movement screen, table assessments, movement screening, uh, strength measures, force plate measures, all those different types of very common measures that
Mhm.
most NBA teams do. And you're trying to create and relate those to norms, right, in the basketball population, because the frame and everything about an NBA player is, and even within the different positions of NBA players, so different than the general population. So you can't just say, hey, this is what hip flexion looks like, or this is what all of this looks like in any sort of other population. Like, you really just have to like apply it to NBA population. Um, but yeah, then naturally, like, then you realize, okay, they're also human, so there's probably some fundamental things that you got to consider at the beginning of the season, and then we just create very simple management strategies at the
Mhm.
beginning of our season. We have conversations with every player, and we say, like, this is your plan, right? But when you start to kind of get through the season, you realize that, yeah, that's everyone's goal and strategy, is you have these initial KPIs and you're trying to manage those KPIs throughout the season. But then shit happens, things happen across the season. You realize, like, dang, he had a calf strain,
Mhm.
at game 20. Oh man, he had this shoulder injury at XYZ. Oh man, he's had nagging patellar tendinopathy as well. So you have, like, okay, we have these 3 things, and you realize the thing that is most consistent in the research is, like, the number one predictor for injury is a previous injury. So, or something that probably hurts and is irritable and a little severe and sensitive. And so you're like, well, I have my KPIs, I remember what it was at the beginning of the season, but this is like what is most like important, and we have such limited time and such, I don't want to say limited resources, that's not true, we have such limited time and constraints that you just end up saying, hey, let's, like, we got to keep this guy healthy, we have to keep him available, these are the things that are most important for him right now. And then you consider what sort of personnel you have on your team, right? So what individual on your team is going to be the absolute best to deliver an intervention, to deliver a message, to deliver whatever needs to be delivered in order to achieve that goal of health and performance, right? So, as a physical therapist, for me, um, I'm going to toot my own horn just a little bit. I feel like I can go for the most part A to Z, but I'm not always that best person to say, hey, like, because I am a strength and conditioning coach as well. But in this setting, like my primary role is physical therapist, day to day management of injuries and
Mhm.
whatnot, right? So, and I have a few guys that I work with every single day. Um, but if things change, I have to be mobile across our team to say, okay, hey, you need my help for that rehab. Okay, let me go help you. Well, if that's the case, now I have some time constraints. Hey, can you do this strength and conditioning thing with this player, right? So there's time, personnel, resources, so many different constraints in it, and it all changes across the course of the NBA season, right?
Oh yeah.
It all affects your decision making and what you decide to do. I'm not sure if I answered it,
No,
especially like
that's
exactly kind of what
fantastic.
you were hoping for,
Yeah, no, I
but
think
yeah,
can you unpack there's a couple of things I want to unpack there.
for sure.
And I appreciate
Yep.
you highlighting that like those of us in the NBA don't necessarily have limited resources. Like we have the financial ability to do a lot of things, but there are definitely these constraints that
Right.
change your management strategies versus if you're seeing somebody like in your previous role in Exos. So can you just touch base on like,
Right.
two or three of what those constraints are so that people, can get a grasp on that it's like not just you have all the time in the world and all the money so you can do the perfect care. Like that's certainly not the case.
1000%, man. Yeah. So I think a few important constraints are time. Time is probably our most important constraint that you have to consider. So if you have let's say 4 or 5 players, right? Hopefully, this is the way it is in Portland. Is we split up um, starters, rotation, and young development players, right? So I have a mix of those, which is helpful because then if I had like imagine if you had all starters, you would be so ineffective at your job. It would just be so difficult because you'd have such little time with
Yeah.
each guy, right? But I think this is very common across the NBA is that one clinician might be paired with several different experience levels of players, right?
Yeah.
And what that allows me to do is kind of waterfall my treatment sessions, right? So younger players are going to come in earlier, typically a rotation player a little bit after. But those veteran players, it just kind of depends. Like if some guy's an early bird, then I might see him a little bit later. You always kind of love that because you get to manipulate when you're going to work with that guy. And then typically your starters, superstars, anyone else, in general, they want to be seen like right before practice or right before a game, right?
Mhm.
It just depends on how their flow works. And so you have important things that you need to do with everyone, obviously, but everyone also needs, important things from them. They need to do their shooting time. They need their film time. They need their personal time, right? They need time to like decompress and sit at their locker or eat or do whatever else,
Yeah.
needs to be done. And so everyone's always like pulling for the player's attention. Um, so time is probably the most difficult constraint that you have to consider. I think I spoke a little bit on it. Is I can speak on resources more here in a second, but um, scope. Scope is another constraint as well, right?
Yeah.
So again, who is the most important and whose skill set is the most elite to be able to complete a certain task, right? And also, maybe I can prelude to some more information. Foreshadow a little bit is like socially, who is the best person to work with maybe a certain player, right? Who can deliver a message and it go the furthest with a certain player or staff member or whatever the situation kind of calls for. So scope is kind of an interesting constraint for sure. And then that person's time or resources or whatever they're available to do and help out. Resources is kind of interesting. Like I could think of resource constraint like equipment, right? Or space, or facilities, environment. Resources is kind of interesting because even though I don't feel limited in cost, like money per se, equipment and space, I feel very often limited in,
Oh yeah.
like especially on the road, because uh, when you're on the road, for the listeners, when you're on the road, you have we travel with a number of different Pelican cases. They're hard cases, and you just pack them full, and you try to really organize them really well in terms of different equipment that you feel like you might need for the players that you have on your team, right? That works really well for their flow and needs. So a bunch of different Pelican cases, like we might set one up for hip rehab, or this one's shoulder rehab, or that one's a strength and conditioning case, and so it has more things that might be used in the with the S&C coaches a little bit more. And oh, we have another big Pelican case for our nutrition staff, right? And everyone has their little cases that they travel with, right? And so unfortunately, you wish, by we all know research out there, we all know best practices, but sometimes your quality is limited by nature of how much load you have access to, right? Maybe you're trying to do a dynamic warm up, or maybe you're trying to do a movement session with a player and you don't have court access, or you don't have enough space in your hotel to do that type of session. So then you're just like, man, like this hotel gym is so small, or man, they have two treadmills and they're both being used by someone else right now, and I really need that.
Yeah.
Or man, I don't have
Mm,
court access right now, and we're just not going to be able to get this movement session done, and it's so important for the player's progression, right? So a lot of those resources are unfortunately kind of some constraints, and all that, I think, in the ultimate goal is, again, player health and player management. You think about, for me, often what I think about is like quality and like risk. Like what level of risk am I tying to that level of quality, right? So, like, for example, I think I am a risk communicator and like a risk mitigator. I often think of my role that way, like what level of risk am I tying to, hey, this player being at this status, if like are we comfortable with this level of risk? Because if we gave this a couple more days, I would feel way more comfortable about the level of risk. But like, what does our team need right now, and what is the player comfortable with, because it's their body, yeah, so all of those, I think, affect your quality and affect the level of risk, and things that you're going to communicate.
yeah, I mean, like when you mentioned constraints and you're talking about like working out in a hotel gym, it's like, yeah, we don't have access to the best quality weight rooms on the road all the time. You don't have access to your full practice facility pre-game.
Right.
Frequently, you're setting up weights in the back hallway of Ball Arena
The arenas. Yep.
because you don't
Right.
have access to a weight room at all to get guys ready. And then that's where you see these videos post game of teams like lifting in a hallway to get their post game lift in. It's like you just don't really have a choice because those resources aren't there. Even in, when if you're at home and the finances are in place, you can have pretty much whatever you want. But I think it's good to
Right.
highlight how challenging some of that stuff is,
Right.
and that
So then
you
it's just,
mentioned. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, so then you think about, that's what I love about it though. It's a challenge, but it's also really special because I get to be the one to take on that challenge and say, well, this is my goal, right? This is where I know we need to be. Well, how can I like narrow that gap with limited resources, being on the road, limited limited sleep, right? Like I get to be that person that says, man, like how can I be agile and nimble enough and get the player to agree to the importance of maybe waking up an hour early in order to access an equipment, environment, space, whatever it is, to be able to get done what they want to get done. Because all they wanted, I mean, ultimately the players, they just want to hoop. You know, that's all they want to do.
Yeah.
They don't want they don't want to wake up at 8 a.m. and, meet in the weight room and do a weight room session at 8 a.m. They just want to hoop at 7 p.m. So
Hmm.
how can we narrow that gap?
I had a player years ago tell me, like, look, you can have me at 11 a.m. for shoot around, or you can have me at 7 p.m. at night, but like, you're not going to get both. I'm like, well,
Yeah. Right.
like, he just wants to hoop for the game. That's all he cares about. And
That's
it
fair.
makes sense when you're looking at it from the player's perspective. And to your point earlier, they've got the equipment staff pulling on them, the player development staff, the coaching staff, an agent, a GM. Like, they're getting pulled in a
Yeah.
million different directions. So, like, I just want to show up and play basketball, man. That's my goal.
Yep.
And you mentioned something there that I think is important too. That frequently, staff in the NBA, like, you're only going to see 2 to 4 guys a day, maybe, right? And if it's like a day between games and all of your guys are healthy and it's an optional day, like, you might not see any of your guys, right? You may have a day that you don't
Right.
treat anybody. And especially as staff sizes have grown, that number shrunk as well too, right? Like back in the day when it was 2 ATs and 2 strength coaches, they certainly had a full caseload. But with this smaller caseload, how do you handle staying fresh in this environment and keeping your
Mhm.
skills up when you might only see, you got 4 guys, you might see an ankle sprain a year and you might not see any shoulder injuries for an entire season.
Facts. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, I love that you brought up this question because I think, it's one, my first season, I really had to learn. I think I felt my first season that my skill set got worse, but now looking back, I don't think that's the case. I think I just needed a lot of reflection. I needed to look back at, you know, I needed to look back and almost remind myself. It sounds a little cheesy, just like remind myself like who I was, what level of clinician and expertise I have, and then I just had to do the work to remind myself like here are my heuristics and plans for when I see this injury, right? It's cool because while I say there's a limited number of time, it's odd, man. There is limited time with players, but there's also an odd amount of downtime where you feel like you can do things that are important to you, right? And for me, a very important thing was keeping my skills, all of my skills, strength and conditioning, physical therapy, and as I developed my sports science skills, like always being able to keep those at an elite level. And when situations happen, like a shoulder injury, I I can remember immediately, like, okay, this is my shoulder exam. This is immediately like my differential, and I know my algorithm and thought process for how I'm going to evaluate injuries and then create my treatment plans. Right? It just um, took me reflection, and I had to go through the thought process of reminding myself like I haven't seen a shoulder, dude. I really have like I haven't seen too many shoulder injuries
Yeah.
or elbow injuries, or a lot of those injuries. You see a lot of wrist and hand, but you don't see a lot of elbow, shoulder, things like that. Even cervical spine. I love
No,
treating
very
the
little.
cervical spine. You just don't see that stuff, you
Mhm.
know?
Unless the guy
Um,
sleeps bad on the road, right? They come in with a little neck pain, and that's like frequently
right.
the extent of
Yeah.
a neck injury.
Right. Yeah. For me, I'm also generally like a friendly and open person too. So when the staff needs help and they have some like odd injury that I haven't seen in a while, I'm like, oh yeah, like let me help you out. Like let's go, because then it gives me those important reps, right?
Hmm.
But yeah, I think the reflection though, just kind of going back to that, the reflection goes deeper than just because in this industry you have to learn very quickly. Um, it's not like you can't make mistakes because you can. I think I felt that way kind of coming into the industry, but mistakes are actually okay. Like there's some critical stuff, but you have such an awesome team around you that if you feel uncomfortable, like there's someone else that's going to be able to be there to help you, right? But um, there's just some critical things like decisions and certain things like you just don't want to miss, especially if you're the primary person evaluating, right? So you kind of want to hold yourself to such an elite level, like, okay, yeah, maybe we have an ankle sprain, right? And player walks in and they're like, man, like, or maybe they're ambulated, but they're not like loading that limb too much, or it's such an awkward thing. Like, you just don't want to miss a fracture, right? Like,
Mhm.
such a, and you haven't seen it in a while, or you don't, you just don't think that that thing might happen or whatever it is. You just don't want to miss those certain things. I just kind of hold myself to that standard. But the reflection, sorry, going back to that, is it uh, goes beyond just clinical practice and the hard skills, because I think reflection can really help you with your social development in the setting, your emotional development in the setting, just learning how to communicate with the players and other staff and everyone that's in the environment, the that has different goals and thought processes that you're just not privy to, right? Like, there's the front office, there's the coaching staff, there's the players, there's basketball operations, there's social media, and all of these people help the ship move. But those social interactions are really important. So reflection for me, my first season was like thinking about what is everyone's role and what are their goals in their role, and how can I like do my job at the best level, but also like support our team and support a winning culture and a winning environment, right? So like being open to those like social interactions and reflecting back on that and realizing like, damn, like that conversation with that coach just didn't go like exactly the way I wanted to, and reflecting on that and learning like, all right, what do I need to do for that person, or what do I need to do for that department, to be better, is was really really key for me my first season. Reflection helped me a lot with that.
There's so much I want to unpack on the social
Yeah.
piece, because I think it's crucial, and you highlighted these different departments, and it's not just kind of what is that person and what is their goals, but there's definitely a different communication strategy with each of those groups
Oh
too, right?
man.
Like,
Right. Right.
I for sure am going to communicate with a player that I've been working with for 5 or 6 years very differently
Right.
than I am going to communicate with the rest of the performance staff, which is also going to be a different strategy than the head coach or the GM or the team president. So, can you talk a little bit on how you manage those different communication styles? Right? Because, like,
Yep.
I'm sure you have different communication styles across people as well. So, how do you balance that?
1000%, man. Yeah. I 1000% agree with you. Like the the nature, the playful, open nature that you might have with a player that you've worked with for 3 years, right? Is so different from the communication strategy you're going to have with the GM or assistant GM or whomever, right? And it's also by nature of like what role I am in, right? So we often talk about this in our department, is like there is a communication flow. There is an appropriate flow of
Mhm.
communication from staff to, let's just say, our director or maybe head athletic trainer, individuals that are communicating sensitive player health information. That's going to go to the coaching staff, head coach, and maybe primary assistant coach, then to the uh, GM and assistant GM, right?
Mhm.
And it would be outside of my scope to communicate directly with our head coach or our GM about player health, because that information needs to be funneled through our director, right? And so the conversations are very open and friendly with, I would say open and friendly with everyone in our organization, because everyone just has that, we have that sort of culture here. But yeah, I'm just not going to go to certain individuals. It's just not my role to
Yeah.
kind of go outside of my lane and discuss that sort of communication, right? Um, I often think my little strategy for this is using the 5 W's of 1 H, right? Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Like, and I think about that whenever I create a certain message or want to deliver a message, right? So if you kind of break that down, just really plain and simple, who, like, am I the person to deliver the information or not, right? Who, what's the information, when, when are we going to deliver that, man? Because
Oh, that's a big
not
one.
every,
That's
not, dude,
undervalued. Yeah.
that's undervalued, man. Like, when are you going to deliver that? Like, are you delivering that right when the player comes in, right before the player takes the court? Like, are you like, yeah, when are you going to do it, man? Is
I
so
want to,
important. I just
yeah,
can't,
I
I
want to
just can't, I
stop
just don't
there
know. I just don't
because,
know if I can really communicate that. Like, you just got to be in the environment to understand that, you know?
yeah, and I think for people too, understanding that like the timing really matters too, because there is some stuff like if it's, you know, 45 minutes on the clock before a game, the coach needs to know now. It can't be like, oh, the
Yep.
player came in and he's sorry, doesn't know if he can go. It's like, well, we kind of got to get to an answer because if you're a starter, we have to
Right.
know before the rosters go in. And then
Yep.
I had these moments on off days or training days where something comes up and you're starting to have the conversation with, say, a coach, a director, or somebody else in the department. And you can tell, like, this just isn't the time to deliver that information, right? Like,
Yep.
they've got too many things going on, or like, I might have a question for them, but they clearly have, you know, 3 or 4 other things on their priority list. So, like, my priority needs to fall secondary to that. So, I just want to spend an extra 30 seconds there
Dude,
because I think that's one of my biggest learnings over the last 5 years inside of sports.
man, yeah. Yeah, that's so key. Yeah, even like the next one, like where, right? Like
Mhm.
where you do it. Yeah, and with who around, you know?
Yeah.
So where you do it, like I might deliver a certain piece of information. I might put my hand on a player's shoulder on the court and just like give them a little praise and just make like the court sometimes is so different from the training room is so different from the strength and conditioning, you know?
Mhm.
Like I might not feel that comfortable like delivering a certain piece of information, but when they're on the court and they're dribbling a ball and you're able to kind of like be in that moment, I just feel sometimes more comfortable delivering certain messages, right? And the player's just going to take it way better, right?
Yes.
And then why, like why and how, yeah, like you have to consider all of them, and it happens as you get really really good at it, and you're in the industry for a long time. It just happens in a split second. It still takes me some time. I'm
Mhm.
sure maybe for everyone at certain different levels, some of that stuff delivering information might keep you up at night. You know,
Oh, yeah. It still
um,
does keep me up at night.
Right. Yeah. There's certain things, man. They're just the information is just so severe and intense that you're just like, I don't know, I don't know how this is gonna go. Sometimes you just gotta say, well, it doesn't really matter how anyone's gonna take it. Like they just need to know and they need to know now.
Mhm.
It's so urgent and severe and important that you just like you gotta do it, you know?
Yeah, and like
Um,
at that point,
or
they
that
can
might not be
take it.
your information to deliver. Right. Right.
Yeah, you just got to figure it out sometimes. And I, I think, to your point, like been almost a decade in pro sports for me now, and there's still, I don't know if wouldn't consider myself an expert in this space, and I certainly feel like anxiety, maybe just angst around communicating some of this at times. Where you're like, God, I hope this comes across the way that I mean it to, right? Because we're all working
Right.
together to keep the ship going in the right direction. But sometimes this information comes off across kind of adversarial or confrontational. And it's like, that's never, it's like, no, you just need to know this now because I don't want to wait 10 minutes to tell you before a crucial decision has been made. So, yeah, I think that's a really
100,000%.
important one.
Yeah. And it's tough. It seems really tough and harsh sometimes, but I think in the environment, once you're in the environment, I think to the outsider it might seem tough and harsh, right? But when
Mm-hmm.
you're in the environment, I have come to realize that it's not um it's not how people say. Sometimes it's like, what they say. Sometimes it goes back and forth, right? With certain individuals. Sometimes the stakes are just so high, like million dollar, multi-million dollar athletes, multi-million dollar contracts, super max players, where you're just like,
Mm-hmm.
dude, like it's just so important. Like we
Yeah.
have to communicate stuff, yeah, like I think me and my staff, we did the math one year. Everyone can do this at home with your favorite player, whatever it was. Just like take their yearly salary and divide it by the games, and you think about how much money is being missed every time that player is not taking the floor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And man, then you think like in playoff situations, you're like, oh man, like these stakes are just so high. Everyone is so competitive and wants to win. Um, so yeah, that all matters. These sorts of stakes and other things are just not the same where I came from in private practice, right? Where I grew up in, the time constraints, the a lot of the constraints are just so different, so for a viewer that's maybe working in a sports clinic, outpatient clinic, whatever it is, that loves and wants to be and thinks about professional sports, is just a fan of the game, whatever it is, it's so tough because you're like, man, I would rehab an ACL so different, or oh man, like why are these players not playing, or why are they getting, there's just so much that goes into it that
Mhm.
yeah, it's hard to communicate until you're really in the environment.
Just peeling back layers of the onion every day, and it feels like
Right,
you're never getting to the middle. Like there's just more and more to find out. So I
right,
guess on
right.
that, I don't want to keep you too long. I know we're in the middle of the season here for you, but you kind of hit
Yeah.
a good one there. For those people that are in clinics, for students that are interested in the space, who do you
Yep.
recommend outside of you, the staff in Portland? Who do you recommend people follow to learn more on whether it's being in the NBA, being in any professional sports team? You've had a lot of experience in this space. Who should people?
Yeah, that's great, man. I would say, just some of the people that I interact with more commonly, I'm going to point out they're just high level clinicians and practitioners. Excuse me. One of my really, really good friends, Jess Ellis, he actually hired me here in Portland. Jess is the VP of he is the VP of
VP.
health for the Knicks. Yep, yep, vice president of health for the Knicks, and he was our director of player health and performance here in Portland when I first arrived here. Now he works for the Knicks. Another one of my really, really good friends, Keegan Ross. He is a physical therapist and strength coach for the Phoenix Suns. Oh man, another solid one is Jared Boyd. He is the director of rehab for the Memphis Grizzlies. Um, yeah, man. Yeah,
That's
there's
good.
just
No,
there's so many great people to point out. But yeah, those three are solid.
yeah, it's I think the outsiders looking in are frequently like, oh, I could do that. And it's like the level in the NBA right now of clinicians and providers there is really high. I mean, I think
Yeah,
over 6 or 7 years, like just seeing who's come into the league and the ideas that people are kicking around and how athletes are getting treated, the level is high right now. It's just trying to keep guys healthy over 82 games is a pretty significant challenge. So give you a
100%.
chance here. Any parting shots, any thoughts, kind of a mic drop moment for you? One last thought before we let you go for this.
For sure. I think when I first arrived to Portland, and when I was working in clinic at Exos, I spent so much time in my younger years as an early clinician developing my skill set, my hard skills, right? And I think the MBA, my first season was such a shock because it is so true, like that common saying, like people don't care how much until they know how much you care, right? And your social and emotional intelligence in this industry will get you so, 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 so far if you pair that with high level skills, right? High level hard skills. So I spend, an equal amount of time. I say equal, an equal amount of time in the MBA, researching, especially when I need to for certain cases, researching hard skills and reaching out to experts and whatever it is and counseling on cases. I spend an equal amount of time as I spend listening to uh, iconic rap music and albums and watching TV shows that the players love to watch and talk about, and watching basketball, just being a fan of the game, right? All of those things, being able to communicate with the people in the space, having that social and emotional intelligence will get you so, so, so far in this industry. I think that's my little soapbox mic drop. Little moment.
I love it. It's a home run. Cruz, we appreciate the time tonight. Thanks so much.
Yes, sir.